Hello and welcome to Football League World TV, where it is time for another edition of The Fan's Voice, where we are hearing from our fan pundits before the start of the 2022-23 EFL season to hear their views on how their club will do in the next 9 months. This afternoon, it's the turn of Preston North End, and I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Weeden. Sam, we're just 2 days away now from North End season beginning. I'm guessing you're excited as I am for football to be back in the next few months.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. It's a good time to be a Preston fan. There's a lot to be optimistic about. As much as it's sometimes nice to have a break from the football, save up a bit of money that's always spent on the away days. It's been, a long 10, 11 weeks now, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into the groove of things.
Yeah, it has been a long time coming. Well, if you are joining us this afternoon, please feel free to send in a comment if you are on Facebook or YouTube watching this, especially if you are a PNE fan. We'd appreciate it if you do share or retweet this. It can be watched back after we have gone off air. Before we look ahead to the new campaign, we must briefly touch on the season just gone. It was a pretty eventful one by PNE standards. We'd had nearly 4 full seasons of Alex Neil in charge before he departed last March, and last season started with Frankie McAvoy promoted to permanent head coach after he'd been Neil's assistant for the last 4 years. But after the up and down results in the first few months of the season, he was replaced at the beginning of December by Ryan Law, who came in from Plymouth Argyle. And before the final couple of months of the season, it did look as though PNE could potentially sneak into that top 6 with the results they were getting. But in the end, it wasn't to be. The results did tail off, and it was the 13th place finish in the end, the mid-table finish for the Lily White. Sam, do you think it was a decent season overall, all things considered? It started off disappointing with the turbulent results under McAvoy, but Law kind of picked up the pieces, didn't he? And mid-table was where we ended up.
Yeah, I think mid-table was quite like a fair finish for us, really. Obviously, you've got the first half real lows of Frankie McAvoy when he came in, who, obviously, no disrespect for Frankie, was assistant under Alex Neil when we had a lot of quite successful spells in the Championship, but he wasn't ever meant to be, and that was reflected in the results. Not many goals were scored, quite a few drawn games, not very entertaining football, quite drab. And then when Ryan came in, he really did galvanise the group, and I think that's what that second half of that season was all about, really. It was about really galvanising the supporters who were quite broken off in the relationship with the club, try to get them excited again, which he really did. And obviously going into next season, I think there's a real optimism around the club that we can hopefully push into the top 6 based on the form we had in the second half of the season under Ryan Lowe.
Yeah, of course, Law did come in December, and he seems to have, in the last 6 months, to really build the report back up with the fans. He came and he took charge of 25 league games and picked up 10 wins, 9 draws, and just 6 defeats. And a lot of those 6 defeats came in the final couple of months of the season. Like I said, they were pushing for the playoffs really in the first few months he was in charge. And when you think back to it, some of the draws that were picked up, it could be considered frustrating as a PNE fan. Some potentially should have been wins, and it would have pushed the club closer to those playoff spots. Sam, the record he did have last season in the league, is that promising going into the new campaign? It shows over the course of a full season, it was essentially top 10 for him. Is that a promising sign going into the new season with new players?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the results we got, to be fair, under Ryan Lowe were probably fair. I know a few mentioned a few of the defeats are quite narrow, but a few of the draws maybe we could have won. But likewise, there were a lot of late equalises as well. So say that record he had was a fair one. But I think what's really encouraging is the fact we only lost 6 games when the manager came in. He came in the middle of the season, so he hadn't had a pre-season to really fully coach his ways that he wants his team to play. It was a lot of them, before his Barnsley game when he got his first win. I think he had about 2 days with them, and then obviously you got the January window, hardly any chance to bring your own players, and everyone knows how difficult the January window can be, and then obviously you're just training for each game as it comes towards the end of the season. So you could probably say Ryan Lowe, I'm sure he'd say it himself, probably until this pre-season I hadn't had a proper chance to properly coach the players to play how he wants to, and I think that's been reflected in these pre-season games. We've seen a couple of tactical tweaks, there's a lot more link-up play between the midfield and the sort of wide centre-backs and the wing-backs as such, which I think will come into fruition this season. So I think out of that record, considering how probably little chance he had to really get his philosophy into the players as such, I think is only encouraging. And when he's had that, he's had that summer now to really coach in his philosophies, his ways of playing, as well as bringing his type of players. And I will come on to it. We've brought in 5 so far, I think. Brought in 6 so far, so I think we've got every chance of hopefully having a successful year.
Yeah, especially in pre-season, we have seen some of his, philosophies get developed on it. It did look like in the second half against Leicester in pre-season that things were developing pretty quickly. Before we look at some of the new faces at Deepdale, we must touch on some departures. There were a lot of releases over the summer. Senior players such as Scott Sinclair, Tom Barkhazen, and Paul Huntington, the latter two, who'd been long-term servants of the club, all departed, as well as young players such as Ethan Walker and Joe Rodwell Grant, two individuals who PNE fans would have had high hopes for, but they have been let go. We also saw the contracts of Tom Bayliss and Josh Earl terminated early in order to join Shrewsbury Town and Fleetwood, respectively. Sam, there's been a major restructure of the playing staff, but is there any of those names in there that you're disappointed to see depart PNE? Either ones that were in the senior squad or ones that you thought may have had a future long term with the club?
It's a tricky one, really, when players go, because, the manager said it himself. It's never everything personal. It's just for the best of the football club. A few of the names being released there, the likes of Joe Rafferty, Paul Huntington, who had been at the club for quite a long period of time, and players who probably, no disrespect intended, weren't championship players. But then you've got other players like Tom Barkhausen, Scott Sinclair, who probably just didn't suit Ryan Lowe's system. I'm surprised, especially with Barkhausen, that he probably didn't get another championship move. That Scott Sinclair, who's probably a household name to a lot of football fans. And I think it's a case that sometimes the manager, you can be backed with incomings, but you can be backed with outgoings as well. And Ryan Lowe's come in, and he wants to play a certain way. He wants to play with wing backs. So there's no room in his system for wingers, which probably did affect the likes of Barkhausen and Scott Sinclair from getting regular time, because these are good players. But the manager, he's been back with his incomings, but he's also been back to let go of the players he doesn't want as well, which will obviously help Preston with the wage budget, because I'm sure these players weren't on cheap deals. So with that saying, I wasn't overly surprised to see anyone go, to be fair. However, I was quite surprised with the Josh Earl one. Not so much that he's gone, because I think Lowe has been quite publicly critical of him, and he wants wing-backs who can really drive forward with the ball, but he couldn't do. But I was quite surprised that they didn't get a fee for Josh Earl, obviously. Being an academy lad, he's had a couple of successful spells at loan in League One, the likes of Burton Albion. He's also, a ripe age. I thought we could have maybe got a fee for him, but to be fair, though, we don't want to stall his career, and if there was no other way to get a deal done to Fleetwood, we can only, just have to cut our losses and just wish him the best at Fleetwood Town.
Yeah, it seems like I really helped Earl, and it looks like he's going to take up a new role of a left-sided centre-back. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on and if he can work his way back up the EFL pyramid. There's been 6 new arrivals this summer at PNE before we kick off the new season. 4 of them permanent and 2 loanees. Let's start with Freddie Woodman. Sammy's coming on a permanent deal from Newcastle United. North End moving quite swiftly after it became quite apparent that Daniel Everson might not be going back out on loan from Leicester City this season. Woodman won the Championship Golden Glove in the 2020-21 season with Swansea City, and last season he was perhaps quite unfortunate to be sat on the bench on loan at Bournemouth. You had to watch Mark Travers put in some really good performances as the Cherries got promoted to the Premier League. Woodman's got big gloves to fill. Everson being the club's player of the year last season, Sam, but do you think he's got the capability to be as good as the greater Dane? He's a good age to develop him, and we know that keepers do play on till they're older than outfield players. So it seems like North End have got someone who can keep goal for years to come, haven't they?
Yeah, well, I think if you asked every Preston fan what the ideal scenario would have been with the goalkeeping department at the end of the season, would have been Daniel Iverson miraculously arriving on a permanent, and they're doing that within our budget. Obviously, that couldn't happen, but I think, as far as replacements go, Freddie Woodman's ideal for it. You want someone to come in on a permanent transfer now, really. We've been using the loan market a lot for goalkeepers, really, since we've been promoted back to the Championship, and even during the time we were in League One. Declan Rudd arrived on loan. Sam Johnston, we had on loan for Wembley. So I think it's really time we started bringing in these permanent players to really nail down and develop and call our own, really, because we've seen in the past that we've become very reliant on loan players, especially last season with the likes of Dan, Sepp and Cameron Archer. So I think bringing Freddie Woodman in on a permanent transfer is a real coup for us. Like you said before, he's got a vast of Championship experience. He's been in the playoffs twice, won the Golden Glove once, experienced success of England at a young age, and he's at a really good age now to come in and probably nail down first team football at a Championship club and build his own career away from Newcastle, really. And I think it's an outstanding piece of business for us. I think he's at a really good age. He's got some really good attributes. He's a very good shot stopper. He's quite good with his feet, probably a lot better than Dan, which will help us play out of the back, which is one of the new philosophies I'm sure Lowe wants to bring in. So I think it's an outstanding signing. one that I think a lot of other Championship clubs will have probably envied when they saw us manage to pull it off. There was a lot of interest, which just shows how good a goalkeeper he is. I think Birmingham are mentioned with it as well. So, yeah, it's a really outstanding transfer for Preston North End, and one that I think, as far as replacing Daniel Iverson could have gone, without it being Daniel Iverson, was really up there with what the best we could have done.
Yeah, PNE are a club that have definitely had some luck with goalkeeper. Johnson have played for the club, and Woodman looks to be another who could potentially progress into being a regular Premier League player. Another player who has joined permanently this summer is Robbie Brady, the Republic of Ireland international. Has plenty of top level experience for the likes of Burnley, Hull, and Norwich, but he hasn't played an awful lot in the last couple of years due to injury and fitness concerns. Sam, I think it's safe to say that if, and it's a big if, the club can keep him fit, Brady could potentially be one of the bargains of the season, considering we've seen him play pretty impressively in pre-season. Obviously, it's different to competitive games, but if he can be kept fit, surely it's a very good signing for the club.
Yeah, massively. I mean, Robbie Brady is another one who's a household name. He's played a lot in the Premier League over the years at Hull and Burnley. But I was a bit confused when we did bring him in, because Lowe often did mention he wanted robust players, which obviously Robbie Brady's injury record, I think he played something like 80 games over the last 6 years or something like that, which suggests you're playing around sort of that 14 to 16 games a season mark, and obviously in a 46-game Championship season, which is already going to be condensed because of the World Cup. I was a little bit sceptical that he'd be able to obviously keep up to tempo for the season. However, having said that, having watched him in pre-season, he does look one level above the tempo of everyone else. He has got that real quality in that left boot, with his deliveries and his, first touch play. So even if he does end up playing that 20 to 25 games, and when we're playing against teams that we're going to have a lot of territory against, and we can get him in the areas in the final third, I'm sure that quality will hopefully tell, and he'll be, with a set piece delivery like that, with the ability to play the ball into the box like that, and that sort of passing range, that really can be the difference in those tight games, which if you are to get into the playoffs, are going to need to be able to score late goals and score big goals. And Robbie Brady's someone who you can feel like you can rely on with that ability on the ball to create those chances for us to get them goals.
Yeah, fingers crossed the club can keep him fit, because we all know what that left boot can do over the years. He's got competition though at left wing back in the form of Manchester United youngster Alvaro Fernandez. He signed this week on loan from the Red Devils for the season. He's only 19 years old, but he was named the club's under-23s player of the year last season, and despite interest from the Bundesliga and La Liga, he's opted to join North End, and there's reports stating that we've guaranteed him regular playing time, and that's what swayed the club to send him to PNE. Sam, I guess it makes sense considering Brady's injuries concerns that Ryan Lowe would want someone with quality to rotate with Brady. Is this a real coup for PNE, despite Fernandez obviously having very little senior experience? He's still very highly rated within Man United's ranks, isn't he?
Yeah, I think this is a signing that really excites me. And when Ryan Lowe was on about bringing in wing backs, this was the type of player that would really make sense to me to bring in. Maybe, obviously, no disrespect to him, more so than Brady. If you look at the attributes Fernandez will bring, apparently he's really good driving the ball forward. And you can see by his goal record last year, he got 4 goals and 9 assists in Premier League B, or I think that's the name of it. So, he's got that quality going forward, and he can really drive you up the pitch. And that's what Lowe typically wants in a wing back, and that was why I was quite surprised when Brady came in, because that's not quite what Brady's game is. But I think bringing Fernandez in, I think he'll really suit Lowe's style, and it's a signing I'm very excited to have, really, and see him develop. We've used the Lowe market really, really well in the last 18 months or so, and I think Alvaro Fernandez has got potential to, be in that threshold with the Seps, the Daniel Iversons, and the Cameron Archers as a really, really good pickup for Preston North End, and one I expect to, be a real standout left wing back in the Championship this year. Done really well to get him.
Yeah, if he's as good as his YouTube compilations are, and PNE are really a good player who looks to be a real talent on those clips. The other loanee to arrive at Deepdale this summer is Troy Parrott. He signed this week from Tottenham Hotspur, with North End beating off several second-tier teams for his services. He's still only 20 years old, which is pretty remarkable considering he seems to have been around for a good few years in the senior game, but he's got plenty of caps for the Republic of Ireland, and he had a good loan spell with MK Dons last season in League One, where he really found his feet, and his stats and figures certainly read well from that particular stint. Sam, obviously PNE were very short in this position up front this summer. Emile Rees shouldered pretty much all the goal scoring burden last season. Jed Evans and Sean Maguire weren't really finding the back of the net. Parrott, he doesn't necessarily guarantee 15 goals a season, especially at championship level, but he's a developing player, isn't he? And he does look to be a kind of perfect foil to Emile Reece in what he can bring to the side in his dropping deep game and hold up play, doesn't he?
Yeah, massively. And I think obviously the club have spent all summer probably trying to get Cameron Archer back, and I don't think that one's dead in the water by any means. But I think what you've got to remember is for the first time since Richard Creswell in the year 2000, last year Preston did have a 20-goal a season striker in Emile Reece. And I think, modern day cult heroes, John Macken, David Nugent, Joe Garner, even though they're cult heroes, that eluded them, that 20-goal a season. I think what Troy Parrott will do is really emphasise Reece's game. Emile Reece is a real threat running in behind. He's got electric pace, and when that space is created for him, either to get one-on-one with a defender or running behind a defender, that is his strength. And I think Troy Parrott will help that. He's more of like a shadow striker, number 10 role, which will allow him picking up the ball in them deep areas, either bringing defenders with him or getting him on the turn, able to slip in Reece. And obviously, for Troy Parrott, will obviously bring out the best in Emile Reece, but I think we'll also see he'll do really well for us individually as well. Obviously, he got 10 goals last year, scored a lot of different type of goals, and from the look of it last year, it was really the year where he started scoring goals. He was getting into them goal scoring positions, scoring a lot of different types of goals, a lot of goal scorers' goals as well. And hopefully next year, Lowe's talking about creating a lot of chances. He said he signed for Preston because Lowe talked about he reckons we can get him in the areas where he can get a lot of chances. And I feel like a Reece and Parrott partnership could really bear fruit for Preston North End. You'd be looking hopefully to get 30 goals between them, and obviously, that would be massive if we're trying to push towards the playoffs. I think it's a really astute signing from us. We've beat off a lot of championship competition. Alex Neil trying to take him to Sunderland as well. I think Middlesbrough are linked to a gunning for promotion this year, probably trying to get in the automatics under Chris Wilder. So it's a really emphatic signing for us, and one that I'm really looking forward to. And I thoroughly expect to start against Wigan and hopefully hit the ground running in that partnership.
Yeah, Parrott certainly makes the strike force look stronger, and Ryan Law's made no secret that he does want 2 new strikers. Parrott is one of those. The question is who is going to be the other one. Cameron Archer, obviously after his loan stint last season, is obviously of interest again, but it does seem less and less likely he'll go out on loan again after striking a few times for Aston Villa in pre-season. But North End are still trying to get that done. Of course, as all PNE fans know, ex-forward Callum Robinson has been linked back with a move from West Brom. It does right now, though, seem like there's basically a bit of a stalemate with Steve Bruce basically telling North End to stump up the cash or move on. Sam, obviously, we know what Callum Robinson can do. That last season he had with us, he struck something like 12 goals in 27 games. He spent a lot of that season injured with a hamstring problem, but he did show his prolific side. But would he be a good fit for North End in this Ryan Law system? And what should the club realistically be stretching to financially to bring him back to the, I think a lot of fans are desperate to see him return, aren't they? But it does have to be for the right price, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if Callum Robinson wasn't an ex-Preston player, I think he'd be a really attractive signing for Preston. Because obviously you only have to look at what he's done in the Championship before with us. Say it wasn't us, he's proved he's a goal-scoring threat. He has that really good link-up play, and he even despite being transfer listed by West Brom last year, I think he was a second top goal scorer, top assist maker in a team that really, really struggled. So you're feeling a firing team. He could really be a threat to any team in the Championship, and a player that a lot of clubs would really want to have. Having said that, financially, if it's not viable, you've got to look towards other targets, haven't you? I mean, we know he's a quality player, and there's a lot of mixed reports on what West Brom want. I mean, some are saying it's 3 million, some are saying it's 4 or 5, and we know that's miles beyond anything that North End would be willing to pay for a player. I don't think we're stretched much beyond 1.5 to 2 since we've got back in the Championship, and it's not worth putting the club's financial health at risk, is it, just for the sake of one player, even if it is a player that we've all got that affiliation to. Obviously, if a deal can maybe be struck later in the window, if West Brom become a bit more desperate to sell him, and if we become a bit more desperate to bring that second striker in, then maybe a deal could be done that way. Maybe there's every chance that West Brom will loan him out towards the end of the window if they feel they aren't going to receive that lump sum of cash for him. It's one that I think will stretch towards the end of the window, but as much as I'd love Robinson back, it would be a dream come true in many ways. It's not worth risking the financial health of the club for, so you just got to trust the hierarchy to, if they do get it done at a sensible price.
Yeah, it's certainly one that looks like it will rumble on until the end of the window, even though, both clubs will probably want to see a deal done as soon as possible if it's able to be done. There is one position on the pitch that Ryan Law does seem pretty happy with, and that is at the back. Sepp van den Berg's loan spell from Liverpool ended at the end of last season. He spent 18 months with the club, and it appears that his direct replacement could be Jordan Storey, who, spent the second half of the last campaign at Sheffield Wednesday in League One, and for all intents and purposes, he impressed there. There's good reports coming out of Hillsborough. I think this is one that's divided the opinion of the fan base, Sam, though. What's your take on the centre-back situation? Should we be looking to add one more, or potentially in that, right-sided role where it looks like Bambo Diaby and Story are competing for, or do you think we're well covered in all spots in that back three?
Yeah, the back three is one that really worries me. I'd looking at the 6 players we've got for there, really. You've got Andrew Hughes, who I do rate quite highly, and he's one I think is genuinely a very good left-sided Championship centre-half. He's played at full-back, he's been able to get up and down the pitch, which looks like what Ryan Lowe wants to do. Greg Cunningham, as his sort of understudy as such now, I don't think he'll be considered as a wing-back anymore, having brought in the Brady and Fernandez from a free agent and on loan, respectively. The middle centre-backs worry me, Lindsay and Bauer. Bauer, as much as he's a bit of a cut hero to the North End force, seems to have lost that yard of pace and under Lowe's more expansive system. I do worry about him when he gets caught one-on-one. I think if you look back to the Reading game last year, he had a real struggle dealing with Lucas Shaw one-on-one, and I think if he ought to play more expansive, he's going to find himself in those situations a lot more. Liam Lindsay can look quality, but we know he's got that rash moment in him. He's picked up a couple of red cards last year, made a couple of defensive howlers, so I'm not sure how comfortable I am with them at the middle centre-half. And then the right centre-back's the one that's really worrying me, Bambo Diaby and Jordan Story, which, even though Jordan Story, who I'll mention now, he did apparently have a really successful loan spell at Sheffield Wednesday last year. He's come back and wanted to fight for a place in the team, which is why we sent him on loan in the first place, because you've got to remember he signed a new 4-year contract at the end of last year, so he's obviously in the club's plans. But I don't think anyone, even the most hardcore Jordan Story fans, can really say that he's not a downgrade on Sepp Vandenberg. I was really surprised we didn't bring in someone like a ball-playing right centre-back to allow for a similar effect that Hughes will have on the left side of the pitch, on the right side of the pitch, because I'm not sure Bambo or Story have that quality in the final third, or that quality on the ball, and potentially Story especially like that yard of pace and composure, and Bambo Diaby, he's a bit of a golden bomb scare, isn't he? You never know what you're going to get with him, but yeah, that's one that does worry me. I'd like to think, even though Lowe says he's happy with it, if a player does become available either on loan or within our budget, that we bring someone in that right centre-back role. But going into the season, I think that could be our Achilles heel and really hold us back in potentially chasing them playoffs.
Yeah, I think I would be leaning towards us needing someone else for that right-sided role. I think it's going to be very hard to replace Sepp Vandenberg after what he did for us, but we'll have to see what happens when the season begins. Maybe Ryan Lowe will change his mind after a few matches, and we'll see what happens. And speaking of matches, of course, the season does kick off tomorrow. The EFL season begins with Huddersfield against Burnley, but PNE's campaign starts with a nice local affair against Wigan Athletic at the DW Stadium on Saturday. There'll be 4,700 North End fans sold out their allocation behind a goal, and that match is followed by home clashes with Hull City, Rotherham and Watford, and then there's also away fixtures against Luton Town and Cardiff City to make up the first 6 games of the campaign. Sam, what do you make of that start? It does look like a mixed bag on paper, doesn't it? There's a relegated Premier League side in there. There's 2 teams promoted from League One, and then there's teams who have added a lot to their team this season in Cardiff, Luton and Hull that we met last season. So what's your overall thoughts on that start?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to say that the fixture list doesn't really matter. You've got to play everyone home and away twice anyway, but I think it does really. I think the fact we've got, on paper anyway, a relatively easy start, touch wood, I've not jinxed us there, but obviously Wigan Athletic and Rotherham have just come up from League One. Neither have really made any standout signings that I think really, maybe you could argue Namby at Wigan, but Rotherham and Wigan as a whole haven't really made any massive signings, and 2 teams I'd expect to struggle. Hull have been active in the window, but struggled a bit last year, and I'll expect them to be down there as well. So they're teams that you're looking at and thinking, can we potentially pick up some points there? With the first 3 fixtures, can we get a bit of momentum under our belts, really get confidence flowing, and potentially, when players see that, you're potentially scouting out towards the end of the window. That can be real attractiveness if you've started the season well. Having said that, Watford have obviously come down from the Premier League. Luton were playoff semi-finalists last year, and their teams I expect to do really, really well this coming season. Watford obviously have a lot of quality that won the second. We got second place in the Championship last time they were there, and a lot of Premier League players. Emmanuel Dennis and Emmanuel Sarr they've managed to keep hold of, who are obviously I expect to do well next year. In Luton, I bought really well. They have a main bulk of the squad from last year, a really good manager in Nathan Jones, and they've also brought in the likes of Coley Woodrow, Carlton Morris, who I expected them to be stronger last year. And Cardiff have been fairly active, but I'm not looking at them and thinking they're a championship team. So for argument's sake, if we can aim for 10 to 12 points from that first 6 games, that could be a real positive start to the season. I think it is doable with the squad we've got, and if we can get that first win under our belts at Wigan, get that first home win under our belts, and get that momentum train going forward, I think there's every chance we can have a really positive start to the season, which will hopefully carry us towards a very successful year.
Yeah, it will be nice to kick off the season with a bang, and we've, the last time we played Wigan at the DW Stadium, I think it was a 2-1 win on Sky, so we've got a good form there. And before we do wrap up this up, Sam, I do want to get your thoughts on where you think North End will end up this season. Obviously, it's difficult to predict before a ball is even being kicked in competitive action, and everyone's not finished their business for the summer. But what are your expectations? Is it to push for the playoffs this season, judging what we have seen under Ryan Lowe, or do you think it could be a bridge too far again this season?
There's 2 ways you can look at it, really. As a Preston fan, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking we've got every chance. We've backed a manager's come in, he's galvanised the fans, and for the first time in a long while, we can say he's been backed. We've released a lot of high-profile players that didn't fit his system. We've brought in players to suit his system that won't have been that cheap towards the club. I mean, Freddie Woodman would have cost a lot of money. No idea what the loan fees would have been for Troy Parrott and Alvaro Fernandez, for example, but I look at it from a neutral perspective, and I think that back 3 could really let us down, really. And there's a lot of, I don't think there'll be any standout teams in the year that are going to run away with it to the extent that Fulham will. But as always in the Championship, there's a lot of quality coming down from the leagues. I mean, Burnley, Watford, and Norwich, I expect to be up there. A lot of big clubs that have been in the Premier League recently, Sheffield United, West Brom, Swansea, I think will give it a real go. I can't imagine the likes of Luton are going to rest on the haunches after last season. I think they're going to give it a real go, and there'll be a lot of teams. That's the magic of the Championship. Anyone from, the 16th up really realistically thinks they have a chance of the playoffs, and they do to an extent. But then again, you could say every year there seems to be a bit of a surprise package. I mean, Barnsley in 2021, Luton and Huddersfield last year. No one really expected Cardiff to win it in 2020. Huddersfield went up in 2017. Every year there seems to be a surprise package, and there's no reason why it can't be Preston North End. But if I was a betting man, there would be other clubs I'd put money on getting to the playoffs before us. But having said that, get a good start under our belts, it's not impossible. And for the first time in a long time as a Preston fan, I can say I am optimistic going into the start of the season.
Yeah, I think we know from how long we have been in the Championship, we know it's a very unpredictable league, and some surprise will be sprung between now and the end of the season. Right, well, thank you, Sam, for joining me this afternoon to look at PNE's upcoming season. This has been the final show of the day at FLW TV. We'll be back tomorrow, though, with the first weekend preview of the season, where I will join Alfie Burns to run through the opening weekend action from all 3 leagues, and then Marcus Ally will host a Peterborough United edition of The Fans Voice with Alex Batt. Thanks for joining us, though, this afternoon, and goodbye for now.